Hey, good morning, guys. This one's a subscribers only stream, all right? So, look, in the grand scheme of things, right, what I've just highlighted on this particular chart, right, is I've had a question in terms of, where are we in the schematic, or what do I think of this schematic? And I think the main kind of point or question needs to be, right, rather than to me, but to yourself. And I think this is kind of part of, the learning, the education, the whole kind of point and purpose of being here is if you're looking for a schematic or you're looking for an Elliott wave count, you got to look at one, zooming out to start with and seeing where we are, big picture. But two, you just got to break down the logic as to, why we seeing what we're seeing, right? So what I've just tried to explain in here is I've literally come from the move down, right? If we're looking and we're assuming a schematic for a move up, right? You got to look at the character change, right? You got to look at the assessment of the character, right? So this is where you're looking for maybe your PS move. You're looking for, your seller's climax type move, right? So there's a couple of things to look at to start with. Now, we can obviously come in and look at these moves, from over here and go up, all the way high, right? But the longs and shorts of it all is that I think the chart that was sent was on a 4 hour, right? So what I'm looking at on a 4 hour time frame, right, is from that last major swing high, right? We clearly failed to make a new high there, right? So the momentum overall would be regarded as technically bearish, right? So if I was to just kind of draw this, this is obviously the last, swing high. We've come down, lower. We've gone back up kind of relatively sideways here before creating a new low, right? Now, at this particular point, we've created a higher high, right? So this is like, oh, yeah, there's something on, there could be something to go, this could have been the two, and off we go, right? At this particular point, we fail to make a new higher high, which means right now, what I'm actually looking for is, sentiment. I'm looking for the clues within the chart as to why character has changed or why it's likely to change, where we are, if we are in a schematic at all, right? Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to try to force, oh, I think we're in this position in a schematic without any kind of real evidence, right? And this is one of the reasons that Wyckoff himself, wouldn't really trade until after the price had left the schematic. The reason for that is that, we're not trying to guess where we are in the schematic. We're trying to use a schematic to know exactly where we are for the upcoming move, right? So the way that I've described this, right, and the way that I've kind of talked about this is in my post, right, back with the rocket call. Let me just find this one right now. In the rocket call, the reason that this was almost so obvious, right, this one here, is that before we had the move, right, we actually had this reaccumulation, right? Now, the fact that the reaccumulation played itself out, what it did was it gave me a kind of an upside target, right? Now, that upside target, right, ultimately led to what I could see as a buyer's climax, right? Look at the candle straight after that buyer's climax, right? Look at that first candle, right? So if you step down a time frame or two from that particular point, you're going to see almost the obvious, right? So let me just switch across to Bitcoin and say I'll come back to Aussie dollar, right? Because I think it's both relevant in terms of explaining, kind of where we are and why, right? So on that weekly time frame, let me just zoom in here. So basically, right, what I was seeing, at this particular point was we'd had this reaccumulation, right? And then we come in and we saw this candle straight after, right? After the target level had already been hit. Okay, so this target level being hit was the kind of first real clue as to, why we do what we do. If I come back in, oh, I've probably lost it now. Here we go. Let me get rid of this. Now, what you can see, right, from this particular move was look how aggressive the AR move become, right? Directly after extending out to a target, right? And like I can't even remember this. See if I can put this on something like this, right? Put something like this on in terms of a fib. No, it wasn't. It might have been this, right? But it might have been a bigger swing down, right? But again, once you get to that target point, right? The target was hit, and you expect that kind of violent move away, right? So for me, this kind of AR, this give the clue, right, as to what was about to happen over here, right? Now, I wasn't 100% obviously, right? This wasn't kind of the point. The general idea is what you'd expect to see. Now, if you wanted to trade this, obviously I called the rocket call. That was in March, I think it was March the 18th, right? So at this particular point, what was kind of obvious was around here, right? Was that the schematic was now playing itself out, right? And like I said, based on the fact that we had this reaccumulation, we had this kind of buyer's climax followed by an AR, we could start to see then this up thrust. And, this particular point was the writings on the wall, right? Now, coming back to obviously what I was saying just now with Aussie dollar is if I come back to a 4 hour time frame to start with, here we go. What I'm looking at, right, with a move like this is what are the clues right now, right? So what I've done is I've labeled these from that last, major swing high, right? We've clearly broken here, right, down to a new low. So for me, the sentiment is still relatively bearish, right, at this particular point. Okay, so although we've come up, we've created a high, we failed to make that new high, right, and we've broken the prior swing low down here, right? So let's go from, this particular stage, right? Now at this particular point, we've had a lower high, lower high, lower high, and you can take the lower lows for granted, right? Now the point is, at this stage, we ended up having a slight change in that character, right, along this move. Because what we actually did here was we created a new higher high based on the prior swing. Right? We failed to take out the previous, right, which meant at this particular point, you got this area, right, as a potential swing change of character. Right? We then come down, we create a new lower high, right? So again, it kind of bearish sentiment resumes. We come up and we literally tag to create another lower high just below this one, right? Lower high, right? Now, the next kind of changing character again comes here. This one's a higher high, right? So for me right now, I'm looking at this saying, what's really changed since this, first of all, let's put these two around. So from this swing down here and this swing up there, right? What's really changed in terms of that swing high, swing low, swing high, right? What's really changed? Well, nothing really in the grand scheme of things. We've had one higher high here. We've had another higher high there. And immediately new lows were created, new lower highs were created, right? So that sentiment is still pretty much, it's bearish, right? So there's nothing that's telling me right now, hey, we've had a PS move. Or there's nothing telling me, oh, this looks very much like an AR, right? Because the reality is, if you're going to go and mark this as an AR, well, why wasn't this an AR? That looks a lot more like an AR move to me, right? This looks an awful lot like an AR move. Now we can go in and we can look at volumes and, we could kind of try to guess where we are right now. But the reality is, having nothing kind of concrete, having nothing obvious, right? It's still guess, right? And it's still a big, big guess in terms of why do you think we are where we are? Now, what's to say that we haven't finished going down yet? Right now, then, does this become, your wall? Does this become, your level? So understanding one, where the bigger levels are. Now we could turn around and say, okay, we're going to look at this level. What if this is, a large scale 1 followed by an even larger scale 2? Which the chances are it might be. So instead of trying to guess where in a schematic we are we even in a schematic? Right? And that's kind of the first question. Right? Now, this isn't me being awkward. This is just me saying, look, these are the kinds of things you want almost concrete proof. You want the evidence that this is where we are and this is the logic supporting why we are where we are, right? So I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say, well, first things first. If I was to run just a simple fib, right? Now, I'm going to go up from, swing low up to my swing high. So, well, yeah, actually, I really like this deep, deep zone, right? This is something for me that I really like, right? I'm going to look at a couple of other things, on that. So let me just put these two levels on, right? This is my kind of zone. I'm going to put this orange, right? This is my kind of zone. These are just so I mark the levels for in a little bit, right? I'll come back to these levels in a second. So first things first, I got the levels on there. I can get rid of this. What I'm going to look at now is things like the blocks. Well, there's clear liquidity, right? You can see from the master patterns, right? You can see what's inside there. It's a massive level of liquidity. There is obviously one down lower, right? But in the grand scheme of things, let's assume that we like this level, right? So now I've got something of interest for me. I've got this level that I like. Now, what I want to start to look at is say, well, I've tagged the level, right? What inside this level? Let me get rid of the stochastic for now. And what I'll do is I'll stick on volume just as a, here we go. So I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say to myself, well, what paints this as any kind of story in schematic sense? Could we argue that the PS was this because this changed the character? Question mark. Right? So here's my first question. Now, like I said, this is where you want to start, breaking this down. Now, if this is obviously what we've had as a breakdown, what do we then go and do? Well, maybe looking at the volume that we've had here, right? There's only this one. Then we've obviously decreased that volume there. So could we argue this being your seller's climax followed by an AR, right? And I think this is actually what you had marked up, right? In terms of the question that I've had this morning. So the reality is, yeah, it's plausible. It's feasible. We've got volume supporting that, right? But this is where you're kind of answering the question almost for yourself now, right? So, do I like this as a PS? Yeah, it's all right, right? It's kind of hidden. What you really want is something a little bit more obvious than this, right? And this is again where you're trying to pick winners, for big moves. You don't want to stress about, I think I might be right. I think I might be all right. I think I'm on the right track. You want to almost know with certain that you're on the right track, right? So if we look at this and say, okay, this gives me, let's put this in a box. This gives me some kind of PS zone to look for, right? Price comes up, price creates a new lower low, creating some kind of seller's climax potentially, right? Now, the other option you have is obviously, could this be a seller's climax? Because although you've got the volume here, you've actually got a bigger cluster of volume there, right? So the next question could be, well, what if I was to remove these and say, well, I personally would prefer this as an AR move, right? I've got a nice big volume cluster that looks, a bit kind of wishy-washy as an AR move. You've got to remember what an AR move, represents, what it's trying to tell you, right? An AR move is obviously that kind of automatic reaction, automatic rally. It's a knee-jerk reaction to what the price has done prior to the move, right? So for me, I'm looking at this saying, well, what about this? What about this as a move? What if this was our seller's climax, right? And this was the AR. Now, would that make a bit more sense? So it makes less sense in terms of the volume spike, but more sense in terms of the volume cluster, right? So at this particular stage, I'm saying, okay, well, I kind of like both of these options right now as a potential move. Wrong one. As a potential move away. Now what I want to look at is what can I see next for, I've done that again. What can I see now as the next kind of move, right? So we've had potentially an SC, or let's use both of these for now, right? So at this particular point, what I've now got is, a couple of things badged up, right? What I want to do, I want to almost hide this volume, right? I'm going to hide this. Well, I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to make it less visible, right? What I want to do, I want to put this maybe, let's say gray, let's say 1 point, right? You can see that they're there, but they kind of hit. So I'll make them white so they're a bit more easy to see for you guys, especially Paul. Right. Then what I want to do, right? I want to change this. Let's say I'm going to put this as a level 2, and I'm going to put this in, let's say, lighter gray. Right. Now what I want to do, I want to mark up both of these areas, right, to see if there's anything more obvious coming in from here. Right? So I'll stick the magnet on, I'll stick this on. Right. Now what I want to do, I want to check the first one. I'm going to put these in big, let's say big blue colors, solid lines. Put these as 2. There's my SC, right? I'm going to use this one as well because obviously if that's an SC or this is an SC, it's going to give me some kind of clue as to where we are. Okay, so I've now gone and marked up a couple of key areas, right? I'm going to ignore my little white lines in here for now. What I want to look at next is what are we doing inside of this move, right? So I've zoomed in, and you can see now this is where now I'm starting to look at this and say, okay, let's question the move, right? So what I want to do to start with, I want to come in and say, let's use the date and range 50% marker of this range. 50% marker, let's put maybe this in red. There we go. Then I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to use the same 50% marker, and I'm going to go from there to there, and I'm going to put this probably in, let's go pink. So my question now, right, is I still have these 2 options as potential plays, right? Like I said, personally, I like this, right? This is definitely an option. I just don't like the SC to AR move as much. What I do like, right, is that if we were to see SC AR, what's stopping us saying, let me see if I can pull this up. No. So the SC AR move, right, what can we see kind of coming down next? Now, if we come down next, right, we could just have a simple test sitting there. Right? Now, obviously, what I'd have to do is to say, well, this potentially is a test as well. Right? You could have an STB type move sitting here. Right? Which means at this particular point, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for potential breakout, and jumping over, this particular move. I want to see break out of this level with kind of conviction, right? So at this particular point, what I want to look at next is what's giving me confidence that we're likely to do something like this, come back for retest and carry on and go, right? So let's go back to a stochastic, right? I kind of like this stochastic at this particular point, this particular level, right? And that's the kind of move I want the stochastic to kind of represent, right? So granted, we got false bar, right? Now the false bar would be kind of a grind up, right? However, we still need a pullback to test that underside before really, really rallying, right? So for me right now, do I like this as an overall move? Probably not, right? What's stopping us coming all the way down, right, and creating a new lower low? Don't know, right? So these are the types of things that when I'm trying to assess a schematic, a level, an area, I'm breaking down looking for the logic, right? Now, my biggest issue, my biggest kind of concern is that given how hidden this move was, right, in terms of that one creating the higher high, it doesn't really give me much confidence in this move, right? So although the chances are one of these two plays could very well be, easily a move, it doesn't have to be, right? And there's nothing that's, smacking me in the face right now to say, hey, this is obvious, right? There's nothing at all that I can see inside of this move that's saying, hey, this is where I need to go. So what I want to do to finish with, right, is I'm going to come back out bigger time frame. So look at this on a daily, look at this on a weekly. Right? Now, obviously, at this particular point, we've already almost exhausted ourselves on a daily. The issue that I have for a move like this, right, is what's to say on a daily time frame now, not a 4 hour, right? What's to say that this is any different to any of the other moves that we've seen before, right? Can I measure this move and say, what difference does this look compared to this? Right now, the only major difference from here to here is we've actually got this move, right? From here to here, right? On this particular move, what we've gone and done is created a change of character to the upside, right? So would the question be, is this our SC, for example, followed by an AR, right? So the issue I have in terms of the where are we in the schematic, I don't know, right? And that's not just saying, oh, I don't know. I'm just giving up. I don't know. There's nothing glaringly obvious to say that this is any different than that move, or this is any different than that move, or this is different than that move, and this is different than that move, right? So the challenge that you have when trying to identify, where we are in a schematic is unless you've got something going back to, the Bitcoin rocket call. The one thing that I do have that I do like in terms of this with Aussie dollar right now is I like the key levels that we're playing at, right? In terms of the time frame, it's less of an issue in terms of a much bigger move, right? So I'm not thinking, oh, well, this is it, this is off and this is going. I'm looking at this saying, what is giving me any kind of clue or indication that this is going, right? So the only other thing that I can see, looking out at this on a daily time frame, is that potentially this candle, right, has given, this one here, has given an awful lot more green volume to the upside than anything else visible in that chart to the left, right? Which means the likelihood here, right, this is our SC, right? This is that climax, right? Now, obviously, at this particular point, that's plausible, right? So now what I want to do is I want to almost start my assessment again using this as the kind of the core concept, right? Because keep in mind, although we can find smaller scale Wyckoff schematics on your smaller time frames, we're talking about a monthly type Elliott swing that we're looking for this, rocketing 1500 pips or more, right? So trying to find this on a 4 hour chart, it's needle in a haystack at this particular point, right? What we're trying to do is if you spot, a 4 hour or 1 hour, 15-minute Wyckoff schematic with the assumption that this is going 1500 pips, right? You've really got to zoom out, right? Because what you could be seeing is this schematic on a 4 hour time frame is only creating, right? And this kind of move, jump across the creek, kind of rally up is only creating the ST or the SC, sorry, the SC move up to an AR, right? So you've got all of this kind of time frame creating this one move, which means we're going to see distribution now shortly, followed by, a move back down into a test or a test in B, right? So at this particular point, you know, are we ready to rally? I don't think so just yet, right? And that's not just Bitcoin, that's obviously Aussie dollar. This is where I think for me the whole DXY, situation comes into play. So I'm asking myself the question, and this is what you need to do when you're looking for these schematics and these setups, is at what scale is the schematic that you're looking for on? Are you looking for a 1 hour to take a daily rally, right? Or is your assumption, a 4 hour to take a monthly rally, right? Now, although you might get some hints of a 4 hour, to give you a little bit of a heads up, the more of the heads up you seek, the more of the risk that you add, right? So for me right now, in terms of this confirmation, I'm going to look at this and say, I don't want to step down the time frame. I want to step up the time frame. Now, at this particular point, right, one thing that scares me on this particular move, and this is one of the reasons that I don't think Aussie dollar is ready to fly just yet, is that one, I like DXY in terms of another rally up. Right? That new rally up is backed up and supported by a false bar stochastic on a weekly time frame Aussie dollar. Right? Now the fact that we've made obviously a change of character on that daily time frame, right, which is obviously creating a new, high. Ideally, we need to take this high out, right? This is, this one, right? This is the kind of, optimal solution in terms of, the ideals now, which, we got plenty of space to go do that, right? So I could see a rally up, maybe another 100 pips, right? Or 60 pips, whatever that is here, right? We might go 70 pips, 80 pips, right? So, an 80 pip move in Aussie dollar, it's a day's worth of swing, right? It's, on average, it's 50, 60, 70 pips, right? So that kind of move in terms of a swing up, right? It's kind of a day away. And I'm not saying it's going to happen in a day. It's a day's worth of candle that could easily move, 70, 80 pips and then kind of come crashing back down, right? So we got likelihood of DXY going up, I like. False bar stochastic weekly Aussie dollar, I don't like so much, right? We then have, let's have a look at the monthly time frame. Monthly time frame right now, we are ready to cross, right? But I think this now is where for me, if I was to guess this and kind of go with my gut, I would say we go up 60, 70, 80 pips. Change of character. This I would regard as my seller's climax. And I think we come back down to at least look towards the bottoms again before we can start to go, right? So that for me is where I would, I would really go into depth in terms of breaking it down, right? And I know for me this is 30 seconds worth of looking at it, right? If I was doing this for myself and nobody else, I've gone and spent a lot more time this morning to create this stream for you guys based on the question that I've just had. And like I said, please don't take me, negative. This isn't a kind of a knock in terms of the question. It's the more the more you see it, the more obvious, the more it kind of smacks you in the face. The easier this is going to be, one, to spot it, which sounds pretty obvious when you say it in hindsight. But two, if there's nothing there giving you, a clear vision or a clear view of that situation, then it's probably not as clear as you'd like it to be. One, to trade it, and two, to kind of really study it, because you're potentially trying to fit the pattern into something where it's clearly either not going to work or it hasn't formed enough yet to justify the pattern, if that makes sense. All right. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one. And any other questions, feel free to to ping me. And guys, honestly, don't feel embarrassed. These questions, these things, feel free to put into the public domain. This is the whole point. Like I said, I'd rather everybody learn than kind of one-on-one where people are missing out on some of these valuable lessons because they've come as a DM, right? I think in the grand scheme of things, if there's similar positions or similar issues that you're seeing after watching one of these videos, right? Just honestly, feel free to, you can obviously still DM, but I think in the grand scheme of things, if it's kind of out in the public domain, it makes it easier for everybody to get that grasp and this understanding, this level of understanding, right? And obviously, I'll keep making videos on the back of trying to show you, what I look for, why I'm looking, what I'm trying to see when I'm looking for these opportunities. And in the grand scheme of things, I think this was a good, a good example in terms of, why I say things like nothing's changed or it's not quite ready. And I go back just to finish this video. I go back to the whole situation with, with Bitcoin. I have people coming to me. I got direct messages. I've got, people on TradingView, especially. These guys are kind of failing to see that 35k, it's still half of that 69k that we were, right? So when I say things like nothing's changed, and they say, "Oh, well, you said nothing's changed at 17k. We're now at 35." The character hasn't changed, right? The character still needs to come down. If this is what bullish looks like, Bitcoin's in trouble, right? Crypto's in trouble, right? And therefore, the lack of understanding as to why nothing's changed, right, is exactly what I've just covered here, right? Is I'm looking at this and going, well, are we off to a one? Well, why is this a one when this wasn't a one or this wasn't a one, right? Look at where we are not in the grand scheme of things, right? So at this particular point, when you can see out to the bigger picture, you can see the bigger picture, it's so much easier to break down what we do smaller time frames based on that bigger picture bias. All right. So anyway, I'm going to leave it like that. Thanks for watching. And like I said, any other questions, feel free to pop them in either the FX or obviously the crypto channels. Cheers, guys. Thanks again.